This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? Well, with a Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can find options that fit your budget and potentially lower your bills. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
Welcome to No One Told Us, the podcast that tells the truth about parenting and talks about all the stuff you wish you knew before having kids. I am your host, Rachael, and today I'm really excited to speak with Dr. Elisabeth Marnik, the Chief Scientific Officer of Those Nerdy Girls and the Science Education and Outreach Director at MDI Biological Laboratory. She has a PhD from Tufts University, where she studied the role of CD4 T cells in the immune system and autoimmune disease. She then joined the MDI Biological Laboratory, where she received an NIH postdoctoral fellowship. And during these training experiences, Liz discovered a passion for science education and communication. Then the COVID pandemic hit, and Liz began using her immunology expertise to educate the public by starting her page on Instagram, Science Wiz Liz. Outside of science, Liz is also a wife, mother of two, runner, hiker, and avid reader. Oh, I'll have to ask you what you're reading at the end. Thank you so much for joining. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you so much for having me.
I wanted to do this episode for a lot of reasons. It seems like a very good time to kind of talk through these things. I don't know if I've ever shared this publicly because now it's kind of embarrassing, but I also used to be kind of vaccine hesitant. I mean, my kids are vaccinated, but I was really scared. I remember being pregnant with my first baby and hysterically crying about having to get one of the vaccines that you get when you're pregnant, maybe the Tdap or something like that. And it was one of the scariest times I've had. I was seeing so much, now I know, misinformation about this online, and it's so important. And this is why I love your work. It's so important to have these conversations from a place of compassion and trying to understand instead of trying to shame, because we're all just trying to do our best and keep our kids healthy and keep ourselves healthy. And some information might be wrong, but that doesn't mean that, we're bad people or bad parents necessarily. So I really appreciate your approach. And I hope that anyone who's listening who is vaccine hesitant can learn something and feel better about their choices. So again, I really appreciate your work and I'm so glad you're here. I wanted to start with kind of your background and what got you into science in the first place. Were you always into science as a little kid, or is it something that came later?
Yeah, I have a really interesting background because I was raised in a household that was anti-vaccine, anti-science, and it's hard because it's not all Christians are not like this, but my family was very fundamentalist Christian, and as part of that, they really adopted this anti-science, anti-vaccine mindset. But it didn't start that way, from what I can tell. I was her first child. She has two of us. And she's an anxious mom in general. So she told me later, this is 20, 30 years after this event happened, she was telling me that I was a newborn and she was in the doctor's office and she had heard some scary stories about vaccines. At the time, somebody had given her a book. I don't even know the name of the book. She couldn't remember, but it was about somebody going deaf after they were saying it was because of the vaccines. So she's read this book. She was very nervous. And she went to her pediatrician before my vaccine appointment and she asked questions. And this was in the 80s, and the pediatrician didn't answer her questions. He essentially told her, in her memory of the event, that you vaccinate your kids because I told you to. Mm. And she left and didn't vaccinate me, and he threw us out of the practice. And from that moment on, we never went back to a pediatrician. The next time I did, obviously I don't remember that because I was a newborn, but the time that I remember going to the doctor then was essentially as a teenager, because I started having some health issues that did require medical intervention. But prior to that, we never went to the doctor because that really pushed my mom in the direction of, we are going to just ignore all medical advice. And then we ended up, when I had to go to school, we ended up being a group of people who had a religious exemption. So I wasn't vaccinated in public school because of that religious exemption. And eventually they pulled me out of school because they were like, it's going to corrupt you.
Wow.
Yeah. So I was told that my goal should be to get married and have a lot of babies. That was what I was supposed to do. And they homeschooled me for a while. And then my parents got, like, they separated. They didn't officially get divorced, but my dad left my mom. And when that happened, we didn't have money anymore. So I couldn't afford to, I guess to backtrack a little bit, I was homeschooled and then I went to a private Christian school. And that private Christian school got too expensive after my dad left us and we didn't have the money. So by this point in time, I was in like ninth or 10th grade. I had never been in a formal science classroom. I had never been in a lab. And when I was getting homeschooled at this point in time, my mom essentially had given up. She didn't care about my education at all anymore. So I had my grandmother buy me a homeschool curriculum. I like begged her to buy me materials and I taught myself. And then finally in 11th grade, I convinced my mom to let me go back to public school. And it was in 11th grade where I had my first science lab. And I fell in love with science. And I was a chemistry class. And I just remember sitting in this class being like, oh my goodness, this is so cool. And I loved the class. And that teacher was phenomenal and really supported me and helped me. Like, they were like, you're great at this. Like, why don't you think about doing this as a career? And that was really the first experience and exposure I had to science.
Oh, I have chills listening to that. That's so incredible. I mean, teachers, I used to be a teacher before this, and I think especially once you get older and you're working with high school kids, like you just never know how you can change someone's life by giving them that small bit of encouragement. That's so amazing. Okay, let's fast forward a bit. What inspired you then to create Science Wiz Liz, and what kind of led to your involvement with those nerdy girls?
Yeah, so after that experience in high school, I did go on to get a bachelor's in biochemistry. I fell in love with science. I decided to go get a PhD. And right before I went to go to grad school, I finally got vaccinated. So I was 23 at that time, and I got all of my vaccines because I knew I was likely to be studying the immune system. So I did all of that training. And then in 2019, I had my first child. So my son is now 6, but he was born in April of 2019. And the experience of being pregnant with him and then postpartum with him was very challenging. So while I was pregnant with him, they thought that he had potentially a rare genetic disease. So it was hard because it was very uncertain, because they're looking at him through, obviously, my uterus, ultrasounds. There was a lot of uncertainty. After he was born, some medical testing again was like, maybe. So then we ended up having to go to Boston Children's Hospital. I had a 7-week-old baby who they told me likely was going to have seizures and maybe never walk or talk or have all of these things happen. And I remember being like paralyzed by anxiety. This was my first baby. I was newly postpartum. I was stressed trying to manage a new human anyway, but then I also had to deal with this potential diagnosis. And I dove into the literature. I found clinical trials. I found all of this information. I joined support groups, and really pretty quickly I started realizing how lucky I was compared to some other parents because I knew the language. I understood the words the doctor were saying. I knew what questions to ask. I knew how to go onto the clinical trial website and like understand the kinds of studies that were happening. And to make a really long story short, we ended up finding out eventually, it took actually multiple years, that my son did not have this condition, and he is now 6 and is doing very well. But that really was my first example of how much access to science information can make a difference. And then right before he turned 1, the pandemic happened. So now I was in this situation where the whole world was dealing with this problem, right? And because of the way that I grew up, a lot of people on my Facebook were still of the anti-vaccine mindset. We're still very against science and medical intervention. So I started to feel a responsibility to address what I was hearing and seeing. So I did, and that was mostly from my private page, from my personal Facebook account. And then it started to get shared more and more, and I started to feel less comfortable doing it from my own page. And that is essentially where I think I officially started Science Wiz Liz in like May of 2020.
Amazing. And yeah, it seems like, or at least from what I can recall, it seemed like COVID just compounded so many of these ideas and so much misinformation. Like the internet just became like a cesspool for misinformation and anti-vax rhetoric. And I haven't really seen that go away. And now it seems like in this new administration, at least in the last few weeks, it's getting worse again. So what do you think is the best way? Because we know that like misinformation is so much more easily believed. And like there's these crazy stats about how misinformation travels so much faster and has such a wider reach than fact, which is really unfortunate. How do you recommend parents kind of like parse through these things and spot misinformation and think critically about these things?
One of the first things that can be helpful to do is to pause and recognize. So when you're seeing something, like think about the way that it's making you feel. If it's making you very scared or very worried or very anxious, then that's a good like check to try to verify that piece of information from other sources. There's a technique called lateral reading. Whereas if you hear a claim or you see a claim about something, then leave whatever website you're on, whatever page you're on, and go to Google and start searching for like the topic in debunk or the topic in sources and trying to see what other information is out there about that topic. That can help you start to kind of parse that out. The other thing that I think is important to remember is that there are tactics that these people use because they are people who make a lot of money off of spreading this misinformation. So I think recognizing there is a profit motive behind this can be important. And they use a technique called flooding the zone. And this is where all of a sudden you're going to start to see claim after claim after claim that seems very similar. And they're doing this because there's a concept called I think illusionary truth is the way that they officially call it, but it's where the more you see something, even if it's not true, the more likely you are to believe that it is true. Mm-hmm. So by flooding the zone, they're helping increase confidence that their very false statement is actually true. Mm-hmm. And being aware of that type of technique can help actually protect you from falling for those types of things. So I think really we need to just get better at pausing and then verifying information outside of whatever app or website or source that we're currently on.
Yes, I think that's so helpful because also like you can find a study, and I'm putting that in air quotes, you can find a study to back up pretty much any claim. And then it's just like this confirmation bias. And people say all the time, like, do your own research. And then they find these studies that are irrelevant or poorly done or don't say what they think it says. So I think it can be really, really hard. And as parents, like who has time? We can't be doing all of this research on every single thing that we see. So I think that's a really helpful reframe is like noticing the emotional reaction and then just taking a quick 5 minutes to like Google or look somewhere else instead of going down these like rabbit holes, right?
Yeah, and I think it is hard because a lot of times people do want to find studies. And I think that's good. Like it's good to want to find resources, but it is hard because you have to think about the kind of study that you're looking at. For example, if it's in an animal, you can't take animal studies and automatically assume it's going to be the same in humans for lots and lots and lots of reasons. Mm-hmm. So if people are using an animal study to make this really like this whatever claim it is, there needs to be a lot of caveats and nuances with whatever they're saying. And a lot of times you'll see the misinformation doesn't say that. Right. It just makes this really bold this bold claim, and then maybe doesn't even give references, or if it does give references, if you go to them, you'll see that it didn't say that. A lot of times they link references that don't even say what they say they're saying, or they're in animals, or they were done on a study of 10 people, which isn't enough either. So you really need to start thinking about if you want to go to studies, then think about like, is the study done in humans or not? How many people were in the study? Who published the study and did it go through peer review, which is a process where other scientists look at the paper and critique it and give edits. And if it doesn't go through that process, then there could be mistakes or other issues that would make it more questionable.
Right. And you often say everyone deserves access to science they can understand. So what do you think are some barriers to accessing trustworthy science information, especially for parents? And then what are some resources that they could use instead that would be better?
Yeah, so I think the biggest barrier is the fact that science is its own language. Right? There's a lot of jargon, there's a lot of technical terms. We don't make that easy for people, and this is why I think science communication is so important. So definitely one of the things that I think is helpful for people is to try to find sources of information that do translate science topics in an accurate and accessible way. So I do that, yes, but there's also many other science communicators who do this. And there's also organizations like those Nerdy Girls that I'm involved with, where we are really focused on helping fill those information gaps or helping to translate areas where there's a lot of information and it can be hard to navigate. And we're really wanting to translate that into actionable, understandable information for parents, but also for any individual. So I
Yeah.
think it can be helpful to go to those sources as well because it is really hard right now. I have a really lofty goal of eventually having every science paper be accompanied by a public lay summary that's very clear and very oriented about what this can and cannot mean for people.
Mm.
But until that actually happens, then I think we have to utilize some of these other sources.
Yeah, that would be amazing because so many of them are either a layperson cannot decipher what they say or what they don't say. They don't know what to look for in methodology, or they're behind a paywall and they can't see anything at all unless they
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a big problem. We're going to take a quick break. And next, I want to talk about some of the common myths around vaccines to see what you can debunk for us. We'll be right back. You know that feeling when it's Monday morning and you're out of literally everything and you have to pack the kids' lunches and give them breakfast and give them a million snacks and you have nothing to pull from in your fridge or pantry? Same. When we can't make it to the grocery store because we've had a really busy weekend, we are so happy that we have all of our Thrive staples in the pantry, from our snacks to our pantry items to things to make the kids for breakfast and sandwiches for school. They've got literally everything we could possibly need. And not only is it convenient because it's delivered, but we can also get our favorites on a subscription. So we don't even ever have to think about it. We can choose how often we want our favorite things delivered and when. So it just makes it ridiculously easy. And we never forget to have our favorite things for our kids on hand. I love Thrive's Healthy Swaps scanner. So you can actually scan a product and it instantly recommends healthier swaps. So I've swapped out some of our more sugary processed type snacks for more filling and high quality things, but are still at a great price on Thrive. So things like Chomps beef sticks, Simple Mills crackers, those are my kids' favorite things for their lunch boxes. And then I also really love the high protein things that they have and things for my pantry to make quick dinners, like the Primal Kitchen sauces. I absolutely love the teriyaki one for grilled chicken. It's so good with rice. If you're ready to make the switch too, go to thrivemarket.com/HeySleepyBaby for 30% off your first order, plus a free $60 gift. Oh my gosh, $60. That's Thrive Market, THRIVE market.com/HeySleepyBaby. thrivemarket.com/HeySleepyBaby for 30% off your first order plus a free $60 gift. That's insane. It is spring, and that means we want to be outside. We have kids' practices. We want to be on the go, going to the beach, taking walks after dinner. We don't have time to be in the kitchen cooking and prepping a million different meals every night. My husband keeps bugging me about when we're getting our next Factor box, and I don't blame him because they are so delicious. I honestly don't really know how they do it, but every single meal tastes like you're eating something from a restaurant. I have no idea how they do it, but it is so delicious and really filling and healthy too. You can also personalize your boxes so that you are meeting your nutrition goals and getting exactly what you want or need, like extra protein or fiber. A couple of our favorite meals recently have been the truffle mushroom macaroni and grilled filet mignon, which is so good. I also love the roasted garlic butter salmon. And I also really am into the loaded mashed potatoes and shredded chicken. It's just so delicious. And again, things that I would never think to make, never take the time to make, but are absolutely delish. So you can get started at factormeals.com/no-one-told-us-50 off and use code no-one-told-us-50 off to get 50% off your order plus free shipping for your first box. That's again code no-one-told-us-50 off at factormeals.com/no-one-told-us-50 off for 50% off plus free shipping. Factor powers your day with satisfying breakfasts, on-the-go lunches, premium dinners, and guilt-free snacks and desserts. So it's much easier to savor more this spring. Factor meals pack in the flavor with none of the fuss. So get yours today. Okay, so most people are probably listening to this because they're curious about vaccines. There's so much worry and panic around vaccines, especially right now. It's something that, again, I mentioned at the top of the episode, I have total empathy for. I have total compassion for being curious about these vaccines and being worried about, giving your baby vaccines. Like, I totally get that. I also thought it was interesting how you said that your mom, who was anti-vax, was a very anxious person, or a very anxious mother, I think you said. And that was something that I had to realize in myself too, which I didn't realize until after I had my first. But a lot of what I was experiencing regarding vaccinating him was actually just that I was anxious. I was an anxious mom. I had postpartum anxiety, and part of it was that. Do you find that there's a lot of overlap between people who lean more anxious and people who are vaccine hesitant or anti-vax?
I know that, right, when you are anxious in general, I also struggle with anxiety. So I was very for vaccinating my kids because I studied the immune system, right? But even then, like with my son, when we were dealing with all of these potential health consequences for him, I did have a moment where I was like, oh my goodness, like, is this the right decision to vaccinate him at birth and then at his early appointments? And I did on time, but I still had that moment of anxiety, even though I did know all of the science behind it. So I do think there is a correlation where there's just some people who are more prone to anxiety, and with that comes a desire to control things, right? So there's a lot in parenting that we can't control. Pretty much everything. Like, right? So, but what you put into your children in whatever way is one thing that you can control. Maybe if they're not, like, they're probably also eating dirt behind your back and you don't realize it. Right? Like, but that does seem, right? That does seem to be some uneasy control thing. And I know in the context of my mom, to this day, that is still, like, she still struggles with anxiety. She is against any intervention to try to cope with that. So she won't go to the doctor still, right? And she won't take even Advil if she needs to. So she's very much of the opinion that, like, her way of coping with her anxiety is to just remove all extra things. So she lives a very narrow scope of existence because of that. So I do think there is a correlation. And that's why I think when I communicate to parents, I am often coming from that common ground. Becoming a mom myself really gave me compassion for the decision that my mother made, even though I didn't agree with it, and I still don't agree with it. Once I was a mom, I understood the challenges. Like, you have this new child in your hand, right? And then all of a sudden you're like, I have this responsibility to do everything I can to keep them safe in a world that is often not equipped to do that or to support parents. So I would say before I was a mom, I was very angry at my own mother for a lot of her decisions. And then after I became a mother, I really understood more so the complexity, and that gave me more compassion and has helped me be a better scientist, a better mom, and a better science communicator.
I love that. That makes total sense. All right. We are going to get into some of the common myths about vaccines. I'm just going to kind of give them to you like rapid fire style, and we'll try to just get through as many as we can. Okay. So the first one, this one is very top of mind right now. Many people still believe that autism is caused by vaccines. How do we know that this is not true?
We have thousands of pieces of data that now show us that vaccines are not associated with autism. So this myth really originated from a really terrible study by a guy named Andrew Wakefield, who had tons of conflicts of interest himself. He was trying to make a new vaccine for measles. He was being paid by parents who already were suing companies because they wanted to be able to say that the vaccine caused their kids' health conditions. And it was a very small study. Again, when we go back to that paper thing I mentioned earlier, you want to look at how many people were included in the study, and it was like 10 or 12 in this study. Since then, though, this myth has persisted and persisted. So people have looked, and we have studies with hundreds and thousands of people and 100,000 people who have looked for an association and have not found it. So we can be very confident that vaccines are not associated with autism because of that vast amount of data. And there are some great, if you in your show notes, if you can include references, I have,
Yes,
there's
please.
some great resources where if people do want to see like the whole compilation of the data that we have, there are some really great references I can give you for your show notes.
That would be amazing. Thank you. And I think it's interesting too. I mean, this one's hard for me because I never want to like doubt a parent's lived experience, right? And say, you didn't experience that didn't happen. So what do you say, or how do you square parents who say, oh, my kid got a vaccine and 3 days later they started regressing in their speech or something like that? You hear like those scary stories all the time.
Yeah, this is the hard part. This is why we can't rely on just individual stories. But I think it is important to recognize that those are lived experiences, that they're not lying about their experience, right? That is what they experienced. And we can use those experiences to inform studies, right? To look into whether or not there is an association. But then we have to look at the whole data that we have. And we don't know in all of these individual stories, right? We don't know what would have happened if the kid hadn't been vaccinated, right? We also have stories where kids started regressing and maybe it wasn't associated with the vaccine in timing, right? So it is hard because there is that confirmation bias where if this event preceded it, you automatically want to say, well, it has to be because of X, Y, Z, when it might have happened anyway and you didn't know. And this often is the case for vaccines and the autism comment, because regressions often happen around that time in the developmental cycle where you are getting your normal childhood vaccines. Right. So why we don't want to like make parents feel bad, right? We have to also acknowledge that we have to go based on the whole totality of evidence that we have.
Yeah, that makes sense. So another common myth or something that's becoming a little bit more like trendy now is people saying we shouldn't have so many vaccines. Back in the 80s, there were fewer. Europe, they don't do as many. So what can you tell us about the schedule for babies and young children for vaccines?
Yeah, so there's a couple really interesting things to mention about this. So I need to give you like a quick immunology lesson to make sure everyone understands what I'm talking about this. But so a vaccine works by taking some component of the pathogen, so the virus or the bacteria, and it turns on the immune response so that you generate a protective immune memory without having to be exposed to the full version of that pathogen. And we call that piece of a pathogen that turns on your immune system an antigen. So that is a piece of something that turns on your immune response. And while we do have more vaccines now, because we have gotten better at developing vaccines to protect kids from more illness, so that's actually a good thing. Kids are now protected from more illnesses due to infectious diseases than we had in the past. But even with that larger number of vaccines, they're actually getting less antigens than they had in the past because we've gotten better at not having to include a bunch of them to develop that protective immunity. Some vaccines only have one antigen, or some only have a few, versus in the past, they would have lots and lots more. So that's one big difference. The other thing is that if you look, many countries are giving very similar vaccine schedules to the US. This is a common myth that they don't. And I think you had Mandy on your podcast, right?
Yes,
so she has, yes, she has some great posts and some reporting on this topic because she has this experience from living in Switzerland herself. And the vaccine schedule is actually very similar between the two. Now, Europe does make some different decisions about, like, chickenpox is like more of an optional vaccine than it is traditionally thought of here in the US. But otherwise, the vaccine schedule is actually quite similar. So definitely check out, again, maybe we can link that in the show notes, that post from Mandy that goes into her experience in Switzerland.
Yeah, that's a great post. I love her work. So similar question to that. A lot of parents think that doing like a slow vaccine schedule or spacing them out or not doing too many on the same day, they think that for some reason is a better choice. Is that a good idea? Is it not a good idea? Does it matter at all?
I am of the opinion that if that is what you have to do to feel comfortable vaccinating your child, then that is better than not vaccinating them.
Yeah.
Now, do you actually need to do that? No. We have a lot of data that shows that the immune system can handle way more antigen exposure than they ever get from having multiple vaccines on one day. Our immune system is very, very competent and very good at this. And if you think about it, just going outside in nature, if your kid gets cut, if they are breathing in pollen, they're being exposed to hundreds and thousands of antigens all the time. Your immune system is competent. But again, if that is what you need to do to feel comfortable vaccinating, then that is better than not vaccinating your kid. The risk that comes with delaying vaccinations is that you're delaying that protection that the child would get, right? And right now, particularly as we see things like measles resurging, we really don't want people delaying the measles vaccine because measles carries so many risks that we want the child to be protected against measles as soon as they can.
Right. Parents are concerned about some of the ingredients found in vaccines. This is another really common thing you see on social media all the time. People talking about mercury and things like that, black box labels, like you see all of these kind of like scary terms. What do these things mean? And should we be worried about the actual ingredients in vaccines?
Yeah, so a lot of times people take like an ingredient list and they twist it because, again, they want to misinform people. Mm-hmm. So, for example, with things like aluminum is included in some vaccines, but at very low doses, you would be exposed to more aluminum from the things that you consume in other ways. So the ingredients are not something that parents need to be worried about. That being said, I understand that when they're seeing all this misinformation and they're seeing these things, that it is concerning. And it's really important to remember that the dose makes the poison. This is a common thing you're going to hear people say, right? So I'm a marathon runner. And one of the big things we are always told to watch out for in running is drinking too much water, because runners have died in marathon races or just in training from overhydrating, from drinking too much water, because even water is toxic in high doses. So the ingredients, again, have been tested. We have lots and lots of data on vaccine safety, and for some people, I understand that they don't trust necessarily the U.S. government for understandable reasons. So you can go to other countries as well, again, and see studies done in other countries on other populations that have those same conclusions and have the same ingredients that we do.
Okay, that's really helpful. And my last question about vaccines in particular is what you just mentioned about the measles outbreak. So why should we be concerned about measles?
Measles is probably one of the infectious diseases that has always freaked me out the most. So I don't love that we're seeing such high rates of measles right now. And there's kind of a couple reasons for this. So I know one thing I'm actually seeing a lot of is like there's this clip from the Brady Bunch circulating, and I am going to try to make a reel about this soon. And they were talking about like a kid getting sent home for measles, and the whole premise is, oh, this isn't a big deal. See how they talked about it back in the 50s. Okay. And that's the context, right, that people are thinking about, because they're trying to say that measles is not a big deal. Yeah. The big point that people are missing, right, is we have learned a lot more since the 50s, which is good, right? We want to have made progress since the 50s. And we now know a lot of things about measles that we didn't know before. So the biggest one that freaks me out is that measles causes something called immune amnesia. So normally, as I kind of mentioned earlier, when your immune system is exposed to a vaccine or to a pathogen, it makes memory. So memory B cells and memory T cells, and those cells either help keep you from getting sick if you get exposed again, or they protect you from getting as sick as you did the first time. So they help protect you against second exposures. The measles virus actually erases that immune memory. And how much of that immune memory is erased does vary depending on individual and those types of things. But in some of the data that we have, it was upwards of like 70% of people's immune memory to prior pathogens. So essentially, this means that all of the prior vaccines and exposures you've had, you're losing a lot of that. So now you are more at risk for secondary infections. And this is actually why scientists noticed this interesting thing when the measles vaccine came out. They noticed that kids were surviving longer than could just be explained by preventing measles deaths themselves. So they noticed that in areas where they rolled out MMR vaccines in like Africa and other developing countries, that kids were surviving much longer and living longer lives. And now we know a lot of that is due to, yes, preventing measles itself, but also preventing those people from dying from other infections after they had measles, because that was what was happening. Because of the immune amnesia, kids would survive measles and then die from another infection in the year or two afterwards because they lost that immune memory.
Wow, that's fascinating.
Yeah, so that freaks me out. And then there's this other rare complication of measles called subacute sclerosing panencephalitis. So it's a very long name. People call it SSPE. And it's this neurodegenerative disease that occurs 7 to 10 years after somebody has survived a measles infection. And it is 100% fatal in anyone who gets it. And it's more likely to happen in kids who are infected with measles at younger ages. So it seems to be more likely to happen in kids under 2 who become infected with measles. And this can cause significant brain damage. People can need ventilators and other care. There was actually a really great article that came out recently. I can again give you the link of a doctor sharing their experience with their sibling having SSPE and dying from it after having had measles in the past. So again, these are things that we didn't know about in the 50s. So yeah, people they had no other option either, right? Like this was their existence. They didn't have a way of preventing it like we do now. And now that we know these things and we have tools to prevent measles, we can prevent these consequences from happening. So it's not just a fever and it's not just a rash, which is what people want you to think. There are these long-term consequences that can happen even if you don't die from the measles infection itself.
That's so scary. I don't know if you watched the show The Pit on HBO Max.
I haven't yet, but I need to because everybody is talking about it.
It is so good. I won't shut up about it. But this last episode that we watched, there was a 13-year-old admitted and they realized that it was measles, but the presenting symptoms were like the kid was lethargic, not responsive. They thought septic, like all of these issues. And they finally figured out measles because they saw that the kid also had a rash. But it was like, oh my God. I had no idea that it could be so incredibly serious and scary. And yeah, it's horrifying that it's making a comeback in some places.
Yeah, and it's hard because, right, so like it is true for anything in life, right? Some people can gamble with a risky thing and be fine. Mm-hmm. But not everybody can. And if you know that there is a way of preventing it, like I wouldn't let my kids ride in a car without a car seat now that I know how safe car seats make driving compared to what they were in the past.
Right. So
for me, it's a very similar thing is like, yes, like everything we do in life has risks. So where can we mitigate those risks? And the measles vaccine is much, 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 much more safe than having to gamble with a measles infection.
Can you explain a little bit about herd immunity and why it's so important for just like the general public to be vaccinated against these kinds of things to protect those people who maybe aren't or can't be vaccinated?
Yeah. So one of my favorite analogies for this is like, I live in Maine, so we just finished a very long and snowy winter. And imagine that you have like a bunch of kids outside in a snowball fight. So they're all throwing snowballs at each other. And then some of the kids start to grab, garbage cans and lids and sleds and they make a shield, right? So if you have these people shielded, then we can put all the little kids behind them and they won't be hit by those snowballs. And that's what is happening with vaccination. So you need a certain number of people in the population to be vaccinated to have enough of those shields around to protect the most at risk in the community. And those could be newborns. I have a friend with a newborn right now who is terrified because they can't be vaccinated for measles because they're too young. Yeah. And so they really are dependent on having everyone in their circle be vaccinated so they can protect this newborn. So again, it's making the shield so that the disease can't get to those people who are most at risk in a population. And for diseases like measles, we really need like 95% of the population to be vaccinated to have enough shields to protect people. And that's because measles is so contagious. So in a room of unvaccinated people, if one person had measles, 9 out of 10 of them would get the infection.
Oh my God.
because it's that contagious. And this is why you need 95% of the population roughly to be vaccinated to have enough of that herd immunity to prevent spread from happening.
Wow. So how serious do you think this is right now? Like, how worried should we be?
I am worried. So we are already having more cases than we had last year, and we are only in April. So I personally went and got my daughter her second MMR vaccine dose early.
Mm.
And I know people who are in outbreak zones who are getting their infants vaccinated early at 6 months. So that's something that I think can be helpful for parents to know. So traditionally, an MMR vaccine is given around 12 months. There's like a wiggle room of like 12 to 15 months. And then the second dose is usually given around like 4. There's like, again, an age range, but usually the earliest is 4. But in the case of traveling, or if you're in an area with an active outbreak, you can get an MMR vaccine dose early for an infant. The earliest they will give it, though, is 6 months of age.
Okay.
And that dose will be what we call a 0 dose, so it doesn't count. They still will have to get two doses for a total of 3.
Like an extra. Okay.
It would be an extra dose. And the reason for that is when you're pregnant, if you've been vaccinated for measles or have had measles, you will pass on antibodies to the fetus. And that does offer some protection, but they do wane, and they can also interfere with how effective the vaccine is. So we usually give it at 12 months because by then most of the maternal antibodies have gone away.
Okay.
But the problem is there is this period where the waning could have happened enough to leave the infant at risk, which is why usually in outbreaks they will give it at 6 months of age.
Okay, that's really helpful to know. So if anybody out there is living in like Texas and is worried, talk to your doctor. And before we take one more quick break, I was going to also just ask, you've been giving us so much helpful information about this and you've broken it down so well, but we've been talking for about 40 minutes and most doctors don't have 40 minutes to spend with their patients and explain all of this. So a lot of times it does, we do get the energy of like, just do it because I said so. You're stupid for asking me questions about this. Like, I'm not going to even entertain this conversation. Just do it. And I think like what happened with your mom, like that can really be a big turnoff and can push people in the other direction, which is not what we want. Do you have any advice for maybe pediatricians or anybody else working in healthcare right now to have like a compassionate bedside manner when it comes to parents who are vaccine hesitant?
Yeah, I think I'm actually giving a talk for healthcare providers on this very topic next week.
Amazing. Okay.
Yeah, so there are healthcare providers out there who want to do this. I think one of the first things is to start from curiosity and compassion. So most of us want to keep our children safe, including the person that you're talking to at that moment in time. Mm-hmm. And you have to understand that they're coming to you with having potentially seen some very scary things or had heard some scary things, right? And I think often if you start from a place of curiosity and compassion, you can make headway, and also recognizing that it can take time and having those consistent conversations. And ultimately, I don't think this is a solution that healthcare providers can fix on their own. Mm-hmm. I think this is where we really need community members, so family members, friends, like clergy, nurses, all of those people in the community who care about these topics to also be engaging with the people in their circle of influence about these topics. Because the way that our healthcare system is right now, doctors can't be expected to do it all because it's not, one of my best friends is a physician and she might only have 10 minutes allocated to see her patient. Yeah. And it's not that she wants to only spend 10 minutes, it's that her job is telling her this is all you have the ability to do.
Yep.
So I think we have to recognize that it really is a complicated situation, and we do need doctors to be better able to respond and provide resources to their patients, but we also can't just depend on them to do it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, we're going to be right back. We're going to take a quick break.
Summer's here, and Nordstrom has everything you need for your best dress season ever. From beach days and weddings to weekend getaways and your everyday wardrobe. Discover stylish options under $100 from tons of your favorite brands like Mango, Skims, Princess Polly, and Madewell. It's easy too with free shipping and free returns, in-store order pickup, and more. Shop today in stores, online at Nordstrom.com, or download the Nordstrom app.
Hey there, travelers. Kaylee Cuoco here. Sorry to interrupt your music, great artist BT Dubs, but wouldn't you rather be there to hear it live? With Priceline, you can get out of your dreams and into your dream concert. They've got millions of travel deals to get you to that festival, gig, rave, sound bath, or sonic experience you've been dreaming of. Download the Priceline app today, and you can save up to 60% off hotels and up to 50% off flights. So don't just dream about that trip. Book it with Priceline.
Go to your happy price, Priceline.
So we were just kind of talking about doctors and having these open conversations with people in the community about vaccines and talking with folks who are vaccine hesitant or anti-vax about the benefits and why they're so important. How can parents have these difficult but really important conversations with loved ones who may not agree? So maybe like one partner wants to vaccinate, the other one doesn't, or parents or in-laws, grandparents, feel very strongly one way or the other. How can we have this dialogue? Like you always say, like from a place of curiosity and compassion.
One of my strategies is to, again, start with questions. So a lot of times, particularly for people who are very they might be tired, or they might have, I know I have friends who have kids who are high risk, so they feel very upset right now because understandably their kids are very at risk right now. Mm-hmm. So it's hard because sometimes our first reaction when we hear things or we hear questions or comments is to get angry, right? Yeah. And to blame people. And that is totally an understandable response because we're living through crazy times. But it's not going to ultimately be what changes minds or improves the situation. And this is why I don't necessarily think everyone has a response, has to do this work, because some people don't have the capacity because maybe you are dealing with a kid who is very high risk, right? But for those of us who do have the capacity and who want to make a difference, even if you're not a medical provider or even if you're not a scientist, there is still a way that you can make a difference, and that's by talking to people. And start from a place of curiosity. So if you hear somebody say, "Oh, I'm not going to vaccinate my kid," be like, "Oh, what did you hear? Oh, why did you make that decision? Or what information did you hear that made you think that? Or what information could I help you access that might change your mind?" Right? So starting with some questions, starting with curiosity about why are they making that decision, or what has informed that, can often help at least open up the channel. And I think the other hard part about this is often it takes a lot of time. And it really does depend on the person and the context. There are some cases where you might never be able to change people's minds, but there also are cases where you can. And I have had those conversations with people, but it has taken time and taken conversation. But it always has started from a place of being curious and also being compassionate, because again, at the end of the day, most of us want to make the best decision. And for us, it might seem obvious, of course I'm going to vaccinate my kid. But when you are being bombarded with misinformation, it's not always easy or accessible to know what is good information versus bad information. So I think we need to remember that while it might be obvious to you, it's not necessarily obvious to everybody. And at the end of the day, we still all want to keep our kids safe.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Liz. I think this conversation is going to help so many people feel a lot better about this. And it's so important, again, just now more than ever. So I really appreciate you taking the time to break everything down for us. My last question is more personal. So what is something that no one told you about being a parent that you wish you'd known before?
There's so many things. And sometimes I think they told me and I didn't believe them.
Or you just couldn't possibly put yourself in that mindset before having a kid. It's just so different.
Right. Yeah. But I think the biggest thing that I have learned is that it's okay to ask for help. And I think we were, especially postpartum, particularly once I had my second baby, I we weren't like a bunch of friends wanted to make meal trains like for us, but like we have resources. So we were like, no, we don't want you to spend your money on making us food because it was like a hard time for people. And in retrospect, I'm like, first of all, they wanted to help me. Like this, like
Right.
I love helping people in this situation. So I've like removed the ability for them to help me in a way. But also I really needed that help. Like it was a really hard postpartum. I had two really hard postpartum experiences. My daughter ended up in the hospital at 3 weeks of age with a virus that
Oh my
was
God.
very scary, and she needed a spinal tap and all of these things. So I really wish that I had been willing to ask for help. So now what I do for my friends who are postpartum is I just am like, we are making you a meal train. We are going to do this. Like, you don't have to
Yes.
feel bad about asking for help. Like,
Yes.
you don't even have to. We will do this. But yeah, I wish sometimes, like, we weren't built to do parenting alone,
No.
and we really need community and being able to ask. And a lot of times people want to help you. They really do, and they just don't know how.
Or they don't want to be
And
pushy. And if you say,
Exactly.
oh, no, thanks, they're just going to be like, oh, okay. They don't want to, they're gonna
Exactly.
force it on you, but they really
Yeah.
would like to help. Yeah, I think that's
Yeah.
such a good one. And I know you said you're an avid reader, so I'm very curious what you're reading right now.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to. So I'm currently reading one of my absolute favorite authors of all time is Karen Thompson Walker.
Okay.
She's only written like, I think this might be her third book, but she wrote The Age of Miracles, which was popular like, I don't know, a while ago. But I'm currently reading her new book, which is called The Strange Case of Jane O.
Ooh, okay. I'll have to add that
And
to
it
my list.
is excellent. I'm only about like, I think 40% of the way in, but it's fantastic.
Okay, great. I will link that for people if they're looking for something to read. Thank you so, so much. Where can people find all of your amazing resources and connect with you?
Yeah, so you can follow me on all of the social media at Science Wiz, WHIZ Liz, with a Z, Liz. I'm most active on Instagram, but I am also trying to expand outward. I also have a Substack newsletter called From the Science Classroom, and I often am posting like as a collaborator for those nerdy girls, but I also oversee the scientific integrity of some of their other posts. So even if it's not a post that I've done, those nerdy girls is a great resource for families as well.
Amazing. And you mentioned some things earlier that we would put in the show notes, so I'll make sure that that's all there too. Again, Liz, thank you so, so much. This is going to be such a helpful episode, and I really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, and thank you so much for having me.